So today is Saturday, July 14th, 2018, and we'll begin our series of teishos on Before Buddha Was Buddha, learning from the Jataka tales. To begin that, I'd like to read from a book that was in some ways seminal to the creation of this book and also to my ever-beginning Zen practice, which was The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell. So I'd like to read from the very last, a couple of pages from the very last chapter of that book called The Hero Today. The problem of mankind today is precisely the opposite to that of those in the comparatively stable periods of the great coordinating mythologies, which are now known as lies. Then all meaning was in the group, in the great anonymous forms, none in the self-expressive individual. Today no meaning is in the group, none in the world. All is in the individual. But there the meaning is absolutely unconscious. One does not know toward what one moves. One does not know by what one is propelled. The lines of communication between the conscious and the unconscious zones of the human psyche have all been cut, and we have been split in two. The hero deed to be wrought is not today what it was in the century of Galileo, where then there was darkness, now there is light, but also where light was, there now is darkness. The modern hero deed must be that of questing to bring to light again the lost Atlantis of the coordinated soul. Obviously, this work cannot be wrought by turning back or away from what has been accomplished by the modern revolution. For the problem is nothing if not that of rendering the modern world spiritually significant, or rather, phrasing the same principle the other way around, nothing if not that of making it possible for men and women to come to full human maturity through the conditions of contemporary life. This is exactly what lay Zen practice, let me comment, is about. What Joseph Campbell is doing here at the end of The Hero with a Thousand Faces is pulling the rug out from his entire book, from under his book, which seemed to be about myth and story, but it's really about a revolutionary act of transformation of the mind and of our society. That's the whole point. To come to full human maturity through the conditions of contemporary life is exactly the challenge of lay practice. That's the whole deal. Our life is a vehicle of potential transformation if we allow practice to be at the very base of it, the foundation of how we live in this world. So, indeed, these conditions themselves are what have rendered the ancient formulae ineffective, misleading, and even pernicious. To go on with Campbell. The community today is the planet, not the bounded nation. Hence, the patterns of projected aggression, which formerly served to coordinate the in-group, can now only break it into factions. The national idea with the flag as totem is today an aggrandizer of the nursery ego, not the annihilator of an infantile situation. Think only of what's happening today, yesterday, in our culture, in our world. That's my interpolation. Its parody rituals of the parade ground serve the ends of hold fast, the tyrant dragon, not the God in whom self-interest is annihilate. And the numerous saints of this anti-cult, namely the patriots, whose ubiquitous photographs draped with flags serve as official icons, are precisely the local threshold guardians, our demon sticky hair. You may remember the Jataka of the Bodhisattva facing the monster sticky hair. This is our challenge today, whom is the first problem of the hero to surpass. He goes on to say, nor can the great world religions as at present understood meet the requirement, for they have become associated with the causes of the factions as instruments of propaganda and self-congratulation. the separation of church and state must be maintained. Then, again, my interpolation. And then Campbell puts in parentheses, even Buddhism has lately suffered this degradation in reaction to the lessons of the West. Zen, of course, still offers a path, this is me speaking, not Campbell, a path of actual transformation, of doing the work that the hero path and heroine path is really all about. It's not a belief system. It's a path of practice realization. To go on, the universal triumph of the secular state has thrown all religious organizations into such a definitely secondary and finally ineffectual position that religious pantomime is hardly more today than a sanctimonious exercise for Sunday morning, whereas business ethics and patriotism stand for the remainder of the week. Look at our culture. This book was written in the 1940s. Look at our culture right now. Such a monkey holiness is not what the functioning world requires. Rather, a transmutation of the whole social order is necessary, so that through every detail and act of secular life, the vitalizing image of the universal that is actually immanent and effective in all of us may be somehow made known to consciousness. This is exactly what Zen practice is about. This is why we're here. And he goes on, this is not a work that consciousness itself can achieve. Consciousness can no more invent or even predict an effective symbol than foretell or control tonight's dream. The whole thing is being worked out on another level, to what is bound to be a long and very frightening process, not only in the depths of every living psyche in the modern world, but also on those titanic battlefields into which the whole planet has lately been converted. We are watching the terrible clash of the Symplegades, through which the soul must pass, identified with neither side. And then finally, the modern hero or heroine, the modern individual who dares to heed the call and seek the mansion of that presence with whom it is our whole destiny to be atoned, cannot, indeed must not, wait for his community or culture to cast off its slough of pride, fear, rationalized avarice, and sanctified misunderstanding. Live, Nietzsche says, as though the day were here. It is not society that is to guide and save the creative hero or heroine, but precisely the reverse. And so every one of us shares the supreme ordeal, carries the cross, this is Christian terms, okay, carries the cross of the Redeemer not in the bright moments of his tribe's great victories, but in the silences of his personal despair. So that's the conclusion of The Hero with 1,000 Faces. Look at our world today and see if Campbell was wrong. And if he wasn't wrong, then the path of practice is tremendously important, not just to ourselves, but as the Buddha said 25 or 2,700 years ago, for all beings. And this is not a mere statement of belief. This is not a mere faith. Look at our world today and tell me it's not literally so. So, now to begin, before Buddha was Buddha, learning from the Jataka tales by Rafe Martin, published by Wisdom Publications this spring, 2018. We'll start at the very beginning. The dedication is to Danon Henry Roshi for his teaching, and Sunyana Graf Roshi for opportunities to teach. And now the opening quotes. This is from Zen Master Dogen, referencing a Jataka tale. Embody in yourself the dedication of a boy spreading his hair on muddy ground for the Buddha to walk on. And then a quote from the flyer and writer Saint-Exupéry, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. You'll be bothered from time to time by storms, fog, Snow, when you are, think of those who went through it before you and say to yourself, what they could do, I could do. So to begin, the preface. Just like us, the Buddha had difficulties. The Jataka tales are ancient stories found in both the Pali Canon and Sanskrit traditions, recounting the many past lives and ongoing spiritual work of Shakyamuni Buddha on his way to his final birth as the prince Siddhartha Gautama. And this is my preface, so it's speaking personally, as you'll see. I have lived with and been moved as well as encouraged and inspired by the Jataka tales for many years. I first encountered them well before I ever began Buddhist practice, in my case Zen practice, back in college in the mid-1960s, when I first read Joseph Campbell's Hero with 1,000 Faces. Jataka tales as well as the life of Buddha were included in that groundbreaking book, and they touched me deeply. In 1970, when I began formal Zen practice, I already had an infant son. A daughter followed 4 years later. So I was on the lookout as I set out on the Buddhist path for stories a family could grow on. I recall some odd circumstances around that time of old books of Jatakas falling off shelves literally into my hands. We seemed drawn to each other. I began telling Jatakas as part of my work as a storyteller and later wrote several books of Jatakas as well. I find that I keep returning to them. For me, they made Zen and Buddhism human, instead of philosophy, or the austere loneliness of early meditation retreats called sesshin in Zen tradition. I found at the heart of these tales a person who tried hard and had a great aspiration to live a life of wisdom and compassion, yet simultaneously found he had a long way to go. The Buddha became a person to me, someone with a history, someone I could take as a guide. I found this vision of commitment and unfolding depth encouraging. The tales helped me to continue my own practice despite difficulties and challenges. As a Zen teacher myself now, I lead several unique retreats each year with Jatakas at their core. In these Jataka sesshin, I've discovered that these old tales, looked at from the perspective of ongoing Zen practice realization, can offer inspiration and encouragement today. In them we find the Buddha facing issues, dealing with difficulties, making tough choices, doing his work, falling down and getting back up. Nothing special or fancy, just the continuing effort of spiritual practice. This book focuses on a selection of particular Jataka tales in which the Buddha in past lives faces temptations and even struggles with self-doubt, as well as other issues and shortcomings. In these tales, he's not beyond life's messes, its challenges and disasters, but is down in the mix, trudging through the mud with the rest of us. The stories make it clear that any issue you or I are working on today, the Buddha also, in some past life, worked on as well. Nothing we're dealing with is outside the path. The book's structure is simple. Each story, presented in brief, is followed by a commentary pointing to its relevance to our lives and practice realization today. From a Zen perspective, I see Dharma practice as a matter of practicing realization, not of doing things to get to something called enlightenment or realization. I'll talk more about this throughout the book. The series of stories begins with the legend of the historic Buddha's home leaving as the Prince Siddhartha Gautama, and ends with his enlightenment beneath the Bodhi tree. These two are not Jatakas per se, but establish the traditional context of the spiritual path set in place by the Jatakas. Finally, the appendix contains a commentary on a Zen koan, connecting the Buddha's efforts in the Jatakas to our lives today. Jatakas form the legendary record of the Buddha's long and winding road to that timeless moment 2,600 years ago of perfect and complete enlightenment, Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi in Sanskrit. They show the many lifetimes of spiritual work involved in maturing from an ordinary person to a fully awakened Buddha. In classical Buddhism, lifetime means the span of years from birth to death. Zen allows for it to mean the lives we live in a breath, an hour, a day, a year, and so on. Take it as you will. Buddhist tradition holds that the Buddha himself told all the stories of the Jataka tales. His birth stories, which by the way is the essential meaning of Jataka, quickly became popular and were sculpted, painted, carved, inscribed, written, retold, and dramatized throughout Buddhist Asia. They are held in esteem by all schools of Buddhism, including Zen. Zen masters through the centuries like Lin Chi, Wu Men, Wan Wu, Hakuin, and Dogen all refer to Jatakas so effortlessly, we assume that their communities knew the tales well. These teachers never say they are referencing Jatakas, but perhaps they didn't need to, any more than we'd need to footnote to be or not to be from Hamlet, or May the Force be with you from Star Wars. The Jatakas may have had the same kind of pervasive cultural resonance. The tales make it clear that to be like the Buddha, we shouldn't imitate the finished product and just sit calmly with a half smile on our face as our life passes by. Rather, like him, we should get up and do the work of facing up to and working with our life's challenges. Rather than emulating the serene guy on the altar, the finished product of all those lifetimes of effort, we learn from Jatakas to be the still unknown Buddhas we each already are. A note on the linguistic convention in the Buddhist tradition. When referring to Shakyamuni Buddha, in his life prior to the one in which he awakened fully to become the Buddha, he is referred to as the Bodhisattva, with a capital B. A Bodhisattva, lowercase, would be anyone on the path of awakening, acting with wisdom and compassion for the sake of all. The word Buddha is said by some to have the same root as to bud. A Buddha, lowercase, then, is a budded being, one in whom all potential has opened fully. The Buddha, capitalized, refers to the historic person born Siddhartha Gautama, who became the awakened one. For those interested in a bit more of the background and history of Jatakas, I recommend two of my earlier books, The Hungry Tigress, Buddhist Myths, Legends, and Jataka Tales, and Endless Path, Awakening Within the Buddhist Imagination, Jataka Tales, Zen Practice, and Daily Life. I also recommend The Jatakas, Birth Stories of the Buddha, translated from the Pali by Sarah Shaw. This is now a Penguin paperback and well worth getting hold of. Finally, it just says the Pali title number for each Jataka is included. Then some acknowledgments. Without the guidance and Zen practice I received from Dane and Henry Roshi, this book would never have seen the light of day. His meticulous and insightful exploration of our koan curriculum was for me transformative. Without the encouragement to use Jatakas to teach the Dharma that I received from Sunyana Graf Roshi and her communities in Vermont and Costa Rica, as well as from Taigen Henderson Roshi and his Zen community in Toronto, my investigation of Jatakas would probably not have continued this far. Sunyana Roshi especially, and Taigen Roshi as well, made the Jatakas an important part of their community's practice and, to be blunt, forced me each year to investigate the Jatakas further so as to have material ready to share in sesshin in the form of daily teisho. The discussions about particular Jatakas that took place over the years with these communities deepened my own understanding considerably. However, without my own practice community, Endless Path Zendo in Rochester, New York, my experience of the Jatakas would never have become so intimate. Having people to share these tales with converted me from a potentially crazed curmudgeon speaking to bare walls to someone with an apparently useful social function. Endless Path members, I am grateful, believe me. Thanks are also due to Josh Bartok, editorial director for Wisdom Publications, for believing in this book and offering enthusiastic support. It has meant a lot. Finally, without my wife Rose's patience, interest, encouragement, wisdom, and love, none of this would have been possible. Thanks to you all. So, to begin, Chapter 1, Prince Siddhartha, the crisis of leaving home. This is the Nidana Katha, the introduction, traditional introduction to the Pali Jataka. So I'll summarize the Jataka and then comment on it from a practice perspective. Approaching the age of 30, the Prince Siddhartha Gautama decides to leave the protection of his palace and head out for the first time, legends say, onto the streets of his city. There, over a 4-day period, he dramatically encounters what are called the 4 ego-devastating signs. He sees a sick man, and for the first time is appalled to discover that everyone gets sick. He sees an old man, and is horrified to discover that all get old. He sees a dead man, and is shocked to learn that even the most privileged die. Then he sees a truth seeker, a yogi, or perhaps a wandering hermit monk, and realizes there is a path leading to something more. Sheltered as he's been, he's never known these things before. After taking it all in, despite the luxuries he's been accustomed to, with great resolution he abandons his home, determined to find that greater truth and bring back something of value to all, or die in the attempt. Now a part of a verse by Ko-un, the great Korean poet, ex-Zen monk, contemporary. But surely you can only come home if you've really left home, can't you? So, prior to the birth of Siddhartha, whose name means every wish fulfilled, the sage predicted that if the child were kept from knowledge of impermanence, he would become a world ruler. If not, he would renounce worldly power and become the Buddha. King Suddhodana, wanting his son Siddhartha to become that great king, did all he could to keep him from the truth. So the prince grew up knowing only happiness and pleasure. But can even the most sheltered child know only contentment? Does the sun always only shine? Is a toe never stubbed? Does a pet never die? A chill wind never blow? Siddhartha's father was fighting the losing battle of a man taking up arms against the sea. When Prince Siddhartha walked out of his palace and found that everything is as impermanent as dust on the wind, he was plunged into despair. Then he rallied, determined to live with open eyes without taking refuge in trance, fantasy, cynicism, or boredom, or hedonism, rather. He would not accept any version of when you get to heaven it will make sense to you. His driving question became, is there a path based on facts that leads to freedom now? With his experience of the 4 signs, aging, sickness, death, and a truth seeker, Siddhartha's road to world rule was demolished. Shocked, dismayed, and then determined to find an answer, he left his home, wife, newborn son, father, foster mother, and all his luxuries in attendance. He may have felt hope, as well as some sense that he was being pushed by circumstance onto the very road he'd been unconsciously seeking all along. He wasn't running away, but trying to find that way that would benefit all, including his wife and child, like a soldier having to go off and fight out of necessity. His faith in what was familiar and comfortable had been shattered. In a sense, he wasn't leaving home. Stripped of everything, he no longer had a home. The destined path reveals itself, and the safety and security of the old homestead are gone, gone, entirely gone. Prince Siddhartha already stood at the edge of the vast, empty ground of reality. Yet it would still take even him 6 more years of intensely focused practice before the truth would be clear. For now, with the overwhelming loss of all the young prince had previously known and believed, he enters the first gate of noble truth, the Gate of Anguish. With the 4 signs, the solid walls that had sheltered, protected, and isolated him are smashed to rubble. He sees that there is no haven from the universal catastrophe. Aiken Roshi used to say that a real center isn't a refuge from the world. It's a place we go to become strong enough to go out into the world and do something beneficial, live in a good way. He sees that there is no haven from the universal catastrophe. We can't hide out from it any place. Illness might be prevented and aging slowed, but all must eventually swirl down the great drain of death. His sense of entitlement and safety is stripped away. No longer an onlooker, exposed and vulnerable, he finds he's been living a dream. His attractive life is a painted corpse. This painful stripping of childish certainties is not unique. We all know exactly how he feels. At some point, we've each had our own insight into the devastation. Thinking that disillusionment is final truth, some become stuck there. Others, trying to hide from their own insight, seek distractions. Perhaps much of the gross national product is the result of a mass flight from reality, driven by repressed anxiety over the inescapable truths of sickness, aging, and death. Some seek to amass not only possessions but power as their bulwark against the defeat that deep down we all know is heading for us with the relentless pace of the ticking clock. Prince Siddhartha's response is something different. He does not turn and run. He does not try to repress what he now knows to be true. He does not hide, attempting to build a bigger, better, even more sheltering palace. He does not become enraged, taking out his despair on others. Instead, he allows himself to become emotionally naked, letting everything he'd once thought to be so drop away. Experiencing the anguish of the first noble truth, he courageously lets all he's known come to nothing, in itself a kind of awakening. The question of what remains when everything we've known, clung to, or believed in is taken away lies at the core of religious practice, and while difficult, can be a turning point into greater reality. Case number 27 of the Blue Cliff Record, a classic and quite beautiful collection of koans, commentaries, and verses, presents a clue. A monk asked Yun Men, "How is it when the trees wither and the leaves fall?" Yun Men answered, "Body exposed in the golden breeze." Nirvana is traditionally described as cool and comfortable because the heat of delusions, false passions, self-centered clingings, the 3 poisons of greed, hatred, and ignorance have all been extinguished. This is a literal meaning of nirvana, blown out like a candle in the wind. When all is gone, gone, entirely gone, as the Heart Sutra says, we find not despair or nothingness, but wisdom and peace. Manjushri, Bodhisattva of transcendent wisdom, swings a sword that cuts through duality. In his other hand is the lotus of awakening. On it the book or scroll of the Prajna Paramitas, heart of perfect wisdom. This wisdom is not added to us, not ever gained by us. Rather, over time, it is revealed as the sword of practiced realization cuts through. When all we've dualistically, self-centeredly clung to is gone, non-dual wisdom is revealed. Thus losing is gaining. The greatly thorough loss, called nirvana, is an immense relief. We touch base with this in small ways in daily zazen, as breath by breath we release the ancient dualistic burden of me in here and everything else and everyone else out there. Breath by breath is how nirvana is realized. Breath by breath is the work of practice realization. Breath by breath is how Manjushri Bodhisattva swings his or her sword. Still, it takes courage to face into the wind of impermanence, which, like the big bad wolf, is blowing our house down. Prince Siddhartha is well prepared, sustained and guided by his own past efforts through what Zen master Dogen termed countless kalpas of assiduous practice. That is, the incalculable eons of work shown in the Jataka tales. Though the tale of home leaving is central to classical accounts of the Buddha's life, how possible is it that even a sheltered prince would only see illness, old age, death, and a truth seeker for the first time at the age of 29? How likely is it that he'd never encountered a sick person or an old one? Maybe he'd never seen a dead person, but wouldn't it be hard to avoid dead pets, work animals, bugs? Then again, perhaps there's nothing unusual about seeing as if for the first time. Zen mind, beginner's mind, may be a cliche at this point, but consider this verse from the 17th century haiku poet Teishitsu. Ah, I said. Ah, it was all I could say. The cherry blossoms of Mount Yoshino. Indeed, I see the cherry blossoms that open each spring as if for the first time. Wonderful beginner's mind. When was it we first saw sickness, old age, and death with such a mind? Perhaps the prince's response is not simply naive. Perhaps with his habitual filters removed, he saw sickness, old age, and death as if for the first time. A haiku by another classical poet, Shohaku, hits the same note. A starlit night, the sky, the size of it, the extent of it. To be utterly struck by what is utterly familiar can be a decisive life moment. Prince Siddhartha's mind was blown open, seeing afresh what had been hiding in plain sight. Perhaps he exclaimed with this beginner's mind, the sick man, ah, the pity of such a life. The old woman, alas, for the painful ugliness of such a life. When was it that we first wised up, got slugged between the eyes by the ordinary truth that everyone gets sick? When were we gut-punched by the realization that even our own cherished bodies would stiffen with age? When were we stunned to understand down to the ventricles of our heart that everyone, the pilot, bus driver, waiter, our partner or child, will die, and no amount of wealth or success can prevent it? How many times did we walk out of our own ordinary palace thinking ourselves well protected before our walls came crashing down? For Siddhartha, the privileged kid from the rich side of the tracks, it hit him at the age of 29 over an intense 3 or 4 day period. Wham! And it was done. Just like that. The fourth sign Siddhartha saw was probably not a monk. There was no Buddhism yet. What he saw was someone on the way who, having survived the crashing down of their own palace walls, was walking with peace, dignity, even serenity amidst the rubble. When the Bodhisattva saw that, he realized that what he thought was the end of his road might only be the beginning. Typically, It's as teenagers that we first begin to sense that something is amiss out in the big, wide world we're preparing to enter. In traditional cultures, puberty is a time of initiation, a time to die to childish illusions and be born as functioning adults. To live fully, we must die to all that is old, habitual, and unexamined. Zazen is our daily practice of this. Letting go of thoughts we've identified with, letting thought sequences become porous or even transparent, is a kind of dying to old ideas, hopes, fears, and conditioning. Momentarily letting go, we wake to what and where we are. We see the wall. Ah, the wall. We see the floor. Ah, the grain of the wood floor. We hear the whoosh of traffic, barking dogs, air conditioning, wind blowing, the caw of a crow. Ordinary things are fresh and new, as if seen or heard for the first time. So begins our path through the mental fog. We enter a sangha, a community of spiritual practice. We encounter teachers, guides, and fellow seekers. If we're lucky, we come to see what the Bodhisattva saw, not that everything is now okay and we can just go home again, thank goodness, and forget our anguish, but rather that there is a path that only appears, indeed can only appear, when our old house lies in ruins. Without a model or map, that path can be hard to find. With it, which is in a sense what Buddhism is, a map of the way, we begin to walk our own version of the road. It may be a long, winding, twisting road with sheer drops and fitful starts and stops. But if we keep going, keep finding our way each time we get lost, eventually what's been lost and shattered is found, and it is whole. Then our original home is everywhere. Everywhere is home. The ancient empty house that stood from the beginning without walls, windows, door, roof, floor is unbreakable. To leave or be forced from the fragile, breakable home built of our own egotistic self-involvement is a first step toward coming home to what will not collapse in ruin. What is breakable must break, so that what is unbreakable may be found. As Crazy Jane says to the bishop in Yeats's poem of that name, nothing is soul or whole that has not been rent. Nothing can be whole, in other words, unless it is first torn, broken, or shattered. Jataka tradition insists that this wasn't the first time the Bodhisattva set out from his home as a seeker of truth. In Jataka number 9 of the Pali collection of 547 Jataka tales, for instance, the Bodhisattva, a long-lived king, finds one single gray hair among his black locks. Taking it as a sign of impermanence sent him by the gods, and with 84,000 years of life still remaining to him, he leaves his throne to his son and goes off to dedicate himself to spiritual practice. But this time, as Siddhartha Gautama, his devastation is complete. It is ripeness, the blossoming of seeds, karmic seeds, he himself planted long ago. The 4 ego-devastating signs are the ringing of his own Jataka-set alarm clock. Wake up! Wake up! Time to finish the job and realize enlightenment for the benefit of all. At some point, our palace walls too crumble, our locked doors swing open, and like Siddhartha, we head out into the darkness where nothing can be known in its old, limited, self-centered way. Going past the boundaries of our parents' kingdom, in other words, the limits that our own parents' conditioning has put on us, and our culture's conditioning, we head out for the forests and mountains, all lesser purposes burned away. In so many ways, his story is our own. Many true paths begin with disaster. Our ship sinks, our train gets wrecked, our plans fail, our hearts break. A whirlwind carries our house away, leaving us naked and exposed. Or we cause enough pain to others to jolt ourselves momentarily awake. If we're lucky, like Prince Siddhartha, we may get a glimpse of the path. Maybe we meet an actual person. Maybe we see a video of the Dalai Lama. Maybe we read a book. Whatever it is, there is a shift, a turning of our life's page. Certainly speaking personally, I can say such a book was The Three Pillars of Zen. It was life-changing. And so was The Hero with a Thousand Faces. The book can do a lot. The young prince in India long ago presents the pattern, but according to the Jatakas, his last home leaving had lots of preparation. He'd already been in past lives a householder, parent, monk, layperson, merchant, soldier, artist, caravan leader, hermit, bridge builder, king, prince, acrobat, sage, child of an ogre, robber, businessman, teacher, doctor, and that's just in the human realm. There were also as many animal lives, as well as lives as non-human beings, serpent-like nagas, tree spirits, devas, or gods. The path of awakening is not simply about being wise. The Jatakas don't shy away from showing the Buddha struggling, even making mistakes. Even for the Buddha, the path took time to mature. His sincerity, commitment, and integrity evolved. Perseverance fueled by vows. That was the key. Prince Siddhartha didn't leave home to become spiritual. It wasn't, I've seen impermanence, now I'm going to get enlightened. It was a more Godot-like, how can I go on? I must go on. But young Prince Siddhartha says more. He says, I will find a way that aids not just myself, but all. Even for the Buddha, dying to the old world, being stripped of everything he'd held dear, was hard. He was human after all. Yet in that difficulty, something was waking up. In losing everything, he'd found again a road to what he'd never even consciously known he'd lost. Avalokiteshvara, Bodhisattva of Compassion, is sometimes shown with 11 heads. If you look over to the left, in front of the Zendo, you'll see Avalokiteshvara, Bodhisattva of Compassion, with 1,000 arms and 11 heads. The 11 heads see all beings in their suffering, and the 1,000 arms, each arm has an open eye in the palm of the hand so it can be skillfully guided to where the eyes see some being in need. Heads and eyes and hands are a response to suffering, a way of doing something about it. The Bodhisattva experiencing devastation and leaving home, and Avalokiteshvara opening all those eyes and hands happen at the same time. Heading out the door is opening the eyes to truth. There is impermanence. There is anguish. Not to see is to have eyes shut. The path of Dharma practice, the path of minute by minute sustained exertion that Zen Master Dogen says is our only real refuge, begins with the first noble truth, the realization of suffering, of anguish. Discovering that its cause lies in our wrong views is the second noble truth. Realizing this, we gain the power to transform our lives and end unnecessary suffering. That's the third noble truth, walking the path of actual practice realization. The eightfold path in our daily lives is the fourth truth. In our daily lives, not just in sitting, not just in the Zendo, in our lives. This path frees us from the cause of sorrow, our own stubbornly fixed belief in a solid ego inside and everything else, trees, bugs, clouds, stars, mountains, rivers, animals, and people out there. There are people who say they don't believe in anything, yet if you poke them, you soon see they believe in quite a lot. They believe in the fixed reality of a forever separate, forever isolated ego self as all they are. The Buddha, too, started out as an ordinary person, believing himself separate and alone. Yet the four signs helped him cut his attachment to that belief and transformed it into the motivation for wisdom and compassion. But he didn't think his way to liberation. He wasn't a philosopher. He was a realizer, someone who'd had enough and decided to do the work needed to wake up. The first truth is noble, not because its pain is ennobling, but because it's a first step on the journey of waking up to all the good that's even now beneath our feet. It's where Dharma practice begins.